Hello, welcome to Oracle DBA 02pro.com. This is Hassan Mir. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk about logical database structure. So what is logical database structure? It refers to the objects available to users to manage the data, like tables, views, indexes, etc. So this blue object here is representing the database. The yellow objects are representing the database objects. It's very important that you are able to distinguish between logical storage structure and logical database structure. We have studied in previous tutorials logical storage structure. We have talked about extents, segments, table spaces. These are all part of storage structure. How and where the objects which are part of database structure are stored is addressed by the storage structure. So the database, and these yellow boxes are representing database objects. How they are stored in the physical files, that question is addressed by the storage structure. How the table will end up in which segment and which table space would be addressed by the storage structure. Okay. Now, database users only see logical database structure, so they only see objects like tables, views, indexes. They don't see objects like segments, extents, and table spaces, because the purpose of those objects, extents, segment, etc., is to address where objects should be stored. But users have access to the actual objects so that they can manage the data, like tables, views, etc. So that's the whole point of this extra layer, storage layer, so that only database layer can be handed over to the users so that they can manage the data efficiently. Otherwise, things would be very complicated if these layers are separate. If we basically storage structure is not separate than the database structure, then things would become complicated. Now, administrators have access to logical storage structure as well, so that they can manage database performance by tweaking extents and segments and other variables associated with these objects. Okay, now this is a very important picture here, because this will drive the point home. The only physical entities are files, and these files refer to as physical structure, which we will talk about later. That physical structure does not only include database files, it also includes some other log files, etc. But the point here is everything eventually end up in a file. So how these database objects like tables, views, indexes, etc. will end up in files will be addressed. This question will be addressed by the storage structure. Okay, so storage structure is basically a mapping between physical structure, which are files, and the database structure, which are objects. Logical storage structure maps how database objects, which are part of logical database structure, would be mapped to the physical files, which are physical storage structure. Okay, so this basically is the diagram that completes the whole picture. On the left side we have database objects, on the right side we have files, and in the middle we have a storage structure. Now, this table in view will end up in which file will be addressed by the storage structure. Like before the relational databases were created, we only used to have like mostly flat file system was used as the database. Flat file system was everything, like all these three layers were basically one layer, and that was physical storage structure. Everything was in file. You would create an entry directly in a file, you would remove the record directly from the file, so end user would be basically looking at the file, and that would be the file stored at this operating system level. So things were a bit complicated at that time. So now relational databases have broken that down into three different layers. Eventually all objects end up being stored in some kind of an Oracle file that exists at operating system level. Now, the only thing that exists at the operating system level are files. There would be few database files, and everything would be in those files. Okay, but when users take a look at things, users will only be looking at database objects, like tables. user would be able to say select everything, all columns from that table. You should be able to describe the structure of the table, but that table does not really physically exist at the back end. If you create a table employee, there is no file created as employee. There's only three, let's say 4 database files, they remain 4. No matter you create 40 different tables, they might of course keep on increasing, and a database administrator might end up adding one or more files like in a long time. But the point here is, when you create a table, there is no file created by that name at the back end, so that table will end up in some existing database file, and the logical storage structure will address that question, because when you create a table, your database administrator must have associated a default table space to your user, so that table will end up in that table space. So that's how it's dictated in which file it will end up into. Now we'll talk about all these things in detail later on in coming tutorials. Now, in logical database structure, we will be studying these objects in detail. So database structure include these objects: table, constraint, index, view, user and schema, profile, sequence, synonym, store logic, external file access, and database link. We'll be talking about all these in detail in coming tutorial. I'll see you in the next tutorial.